listen, never in my life associated the word boring with baseball.
We know what's up.
Me? Yeah. Famous? Yeah.
And I'm like giddy over there smiling like, we're about to win this shit.
Did everyone give you crap? Give me a good host story.
I'm not picking it up.
We both love the game.
We talk about it every day.
Get on baseball.
Having some popcorn, you're fooling around your phone.
I'd have to wait in line for 3 hours.
Hang on, because it's about to be a wild ride.
But I had some free afternoons, so we were just kind of listening to the games, and you were having a blast in the booth. You had Lucas Giolito up there, who turns out to be kind of a great guy and really had great observation. So yeah, it's fantastic.
So again, this is I always, when it comes to baseball fans, going to spring training games, making sort of these pilgrimage to spring training games, because that shows me that people want to see the green grass, the nice weather, the faceless, nameless players. It doesn't matter, the great game of baseball, but also, like I said, listening to baseball games. So again, I just can't get over how much I appreciate you doing this in terms of listening and fanning and whatever it is. But John, so I want to go back to, this is Baseball Fans Aren't Boring. You are a baseball fan. You are a Red Sox fan, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah, as suggested by your shirt. There it is. So I know that you went to Phillips Andover in Andover, Massachusetts. You went to Harvard, obviously, also in Massachusetts. Where did your fandom begin?
Genetic. I was born with it in the womb. I mean, I grew up in Carlisle, Massachusetts. My father is from Newton, from Waban. My mother's from Brookline. They were huge fans. Growing up, my grandparents, who were all huge fans. It just was something that was everywhere. It was and if you were in Massachusetts in the 70s, and I was born in 1972, sort of became a cognizant human being in the late 70s. It was just such a big deal. It was such a big deal. Those 77, 78 Red Sox, I don't remember 75. They were such a big deal. You couldn't help but be a Giant fan.
Well, and I'm going to ask you this cliche question, which we've asked a ton of people, and different people come from different parts of the country that in our world of baseball isn't boring, but there is this common theme of, do you remember the first time you walk into a stadium? Like you and I grew up also in the Boston area. I walk into a stadium, I can tell you, the green is never greener, the whites are never whiter. A good friend, actor Nate Cordry, said this is where he was introduced to a whole new world in the Fenway restrooms, because they had troughs.
The troughs.
Troughs, in which for a kid, it's like, what's going on? So anyway, there was all of this, like the seats, the smells. I don't know if you necessarily remember the first time you walked into it, but what do you remember about maybe one of the first times you walked into a stadium?
I do vaguely. The first game I remember going to was a Red Sox game. I don't remember if it was 77 or 78, but it was against the Blue Jays. And it was a day game. And absolutely, you walk out of the tunnel or whatever, you walk out, you see all the seats. It's just gorgeous. I don't remember tons from that game, except that they lost, and Bob Bailey, I think Red Sox legend Bob Bailey, hit a home run. And for whatever reason, I saved his cards for years. I have a lot of Bob Bailey Red Sox cards.
That's good though. That's what, John, to come back to it. I talked to Brett Phillips, who is this guy who, played in the major leagues, Tampa Bay, loves to have fun. And I talked to him, and he said, I can tell you how to grow baseball by 50% overnight by having everybody sign autographs for 10 minutes. And I say that because Bob Bailey is stuck in your head for that moment, right? And just like that one thing, and whether it's signing an autograph or someone hitting a home run the first game, that's what it's all about, right?
I mean, completely. I mean, I like, he had a couple 14 home runs years or something, and I think I know that because I saved his baseball cards forever.
I'll give you $1 if you integrate Bob Bailey into your show. So
I don't think that be the last dollar I ever made on TV.
Dollar you ever made. All right. So as your fandom gets going, and it's sort of, I'm a couple of years older than you, but similar at the same time. For my first team really was the '78 Red Sox.
Oh, me
Which
too.
I could do the batting stance for every one of those guys, which is what you also do, right? In
Yeah.
wiffle ball, right?
So the '78 team. I don't know if it was like this in your town, but I was in I think it was first grade, and it was an afternoon game, and the school had an assembly for the game. The entire school went into a room to watch the beginning of the game, which you did, and then we all got in buses and went home. And I got home, and my entire extended family was home watching the game. It's actually one of my more vivid, young, depressing, but vivid younger memories is that game in 19, the one game playoff in 1978, game 163.
Yeah, no, you're scratching right where I itch. I mean, the fact is, I think there's a 30 for 30 done, not necessarily on that game. There's been a great documentary done on that game. We're talking about the one game playoff
Yeah.
between the Red Sox Yankees. But the people, the kids, like what you said, because we had on Bill O'Brien, who's now the head coach of Boston College football
Yeah.
team, and he told a similar story. He remembers what I remember, which is running home to go watch this game. So, I mean, good for your school though for showing.
The old brown TVs, like the big ones they wheeled in, these big brown TVs with the giant tubes in them. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I look that I can still work myself up into like serious depression from even thinking about that game. But yeah,
Were you like I was, where you were you looked at the Yankees then, and I said, I want to be a major league player unless it's with the Yankees. I'll play for any team, but like 8-year-old Robbie Bradford is not playing for the New York Yankees no matter how much money you throw at me.
one of the things I like to say, it's sort of become in vogue in this world to say like, oh, we don't hate anymore. Like, get rid of hate. I hate the Yankees. Like I really, truly, to my core, hate the Yankees. And it's one of the things that keeps me going in life. I think that hate fuels me. But no, I can't stand them. I moved to New York right after college. I've actually lived in New York longer than I ever lived in Boston now. Moved to New York right after college in 1995. And those first few years I was in New York, the Yankees were so good. I mean, I was in New York for their entire, World Series run, and it was awful. People say, "Oh, do you go to games? Do you go when the Red Sox are in town?" I'm like, I did until I would leave in tears every single time. Yeah, it was terrible for so long. I mean, I got over the worst of it, but I'm still willing to really dislike them. Like the
But
fact that Soto left them brought me great joy.
yeah, well, I think I saw your tweet, like, hey, no one ever comes back from 3-0, and
Yeah.
obviously the Reds like good luck with that, like with the Yankees, and that was the narrative I remember being in the Yankees clubhouse after they won that first game, coming back, and Luke Weaver saying to me, "Yeah, like I watched the Netflix documentary, like I know that was the blueprint for us to come back until it wasn't the blueprint for it to come back. So congratulations to you." So.
Yeah.
But it has a different dynamic when we come to rivalries. We want rivalries. We want that
Oh
vitriol.
yeah.
Like we want it. I'll give the Dodgers, Red Sox, Yankees. But so I don't know if you saw the back and forth with our guy Joe Kelly and the Yankees and all that. The Yankees can't feel the baseball. They go back. He goes back in the latest one about a couple of weeks ago. He comes on the podcast and said, my 9-year-old team can cover first base. You know who I know can't cover first base? The Yankees. So, but that's and everyone's like, oh my goodness, Joe is doing this and Aaron Boone. Like this is what we want. Like this is what we want. I feel.
Yeah. When I see Derek Jeter in commercials, I say, he doesn't have a lot of range, just like his fielding.
Who is who would you say in your world that you've worked with have you gotten the most spirited baseball conversations / debate / arguments with?
I had so John King, who's on CNN, is a
Yep.
huge Boston fan, like huge Boston fan, and that's great. But the Charlie Gibson, who was anchor of Good Morning America and then anchor of World News for a time, is a huge baseball fan, and he was an Orioles fan back before, he lived in Washington much of his life, and he was an Orioles fan from that. and he just loved every aspect of the game. And we got this is actually a fun story. In I guess it was '98, right? During the Griffey McGuire Sosa home run thing, ABC News decided to do a special, a half-hour special on the chase that they aired at like 8 o'clock in prime time at night. And I was a writer then. At that point, I was writing for World News Tonight. I was writing for Peter Jennings, and Charlie was filling in. But I was the writer. I wrote that show for him with him, and they flew us up to the Baseball Hall of Fame, closed the Baseball Hall of Fame in the early evening, and Charlie anchored this special about the home run chase from Cooperstown, and it was the coolest thing. But he's a huge fan. Love talking to him about baseball.
Is there, and along with the media, politicians obviously will use baseball as props. Let's just be honest,
Yeah.
right? But who do you feel like is the politician that you've come across that isn't that way, like is legit?
George W. Bush. Well, I covered as a producer the 2000 Bush Gore campaign, but I was on Bush and I was with him for like 19 months. It was my job to be with him every day. And he had of course had come off from owning the Rangers at that point, but he was a legit baseball fan. And those were the Pedro days. I mean, that was when Pedro was pitching for the Red Sox. He knew I was a Red Sox fan. Anytime Pedro was on the mound, I was obviously watching the night before. And I remember there was one day, and I can't remember exactly what the date was or where we were, but he was on stage at a rally at an event. And Pedro had pitched the night before and done Pedro things. I'm sure he struck out 17 people. One guy got to first base in the game, something like that. And so Bush is on stage, sees me back on the press risers and goes like this, with his arm, like, righty motion. And I'm like, aren't you supposed to be running for president here? Don't you have something to do? But he was legitimately a baseball fan and loved talking about. Oh, and I have a great Mitt Romney story too.
Oh,
which is
nice.
Mitt Romney.
Yeah.
So Mitt, who was of course governor of Massachusetts, and so people think is super buttoned up. This is years later after I was on air. I was covering Mitt Romney as he was considering running for president before 2012. So he'd run and lost in '08, was considering running again, was traveling the country, and I was with him. He was traveling alone, campaigning for people. And we were sitting next to each other on a plane, just because he flew coach in commercial, a guy worth hundreds of millions of dollars, coach in commercial. I'm sitting on some U.S. air flight with him, and we start talking. And of course, the Romneys are LDS, Latter Day Saints, Mormons. And I'm Jewish, and we started trying to compare who had better baseball players, and so he's throwing out Bruce Hurst and Dale Murphy, and I'm Kevin Youkilis, and Sandy Koufax, and that was sort of hilarious to me. And I was thinking about that. I'm like, geez, if people knew, governor, that you were like this, it might be a better, this was kind of a cool thing.
I mean, like, let's go. Use baseball. Like other people do it if it's legit, let's go. But to go back to George W. Bush, obviously maybe the greatest first pitch ever thrown, like all things considered, right? And we had Mike Brenly, who worked for the Red Sox. His dad, obviously, Bob Brenly, who was the manager of the Arizona Diamondbacks at the time, he tells the story of being 14-year-old Mike being underneath with George W. Bush warming up or whatever it was. But that was, I'll just say it, like, I think it may have been the best first pitch and most impactful first pitch ever thrown, right?
It absolutely meant the most. It's funny because he did that. That was the end of his first year in office, or he inaugurated in January. People don't remember it wasn't the first pitch he'd thrown out that year. He actually, and this was before 9/11, in April of 2001. He'd been president for a few months. He threw out the first pitch in Miller Park in Milwaukee as a favor at Bud Selig. So he went out there, and in the like 5 days before throwing out the first pitch in Milwaukee, he'd been practicing on the South Lawn throwing because he didn't want to bounce it because he knows baseball. He knows like the one thing you can't do is bounce the first pitch.
Right.
And I got word like off the record from someone that he'd been, practicing hours every day, and I couldn't get them to give it to me on the record. I suppose I'm breaking that now, but I feel like 25 later
Yeah,
here,
yeah,
25 years later.
it's all
But
good.
he had practiced all the time to not bounce that first pitch in Milwaukee. And so it was super important to him. But yeah, no, the 9/11, the post 9/11 one was majestic.
Well, you have also thrown out a first pitch.
And Pawtucket
Okay.
once.
Okay.
And that was because I was doing a story for Good Morning America back when I was at ABC on first pitches. So I did a story about, because so many people every year, these entertainers and actors, they screw it up, they look silly. So I did this story about, how you do it, what's the right way, what's the wrong way, and we got the Paw Sox to let me go up at McCoy Stadium and do it. And Mark Wagner, who never really got a shot in the bigs, was the
Yeah.
catcher. And so he was super nice guy, but we had an awesome talk and he helped me get ready to throw the first pitch. And it went okay. I didn't bounce, I didn't
So
bounce it. So that's all I want.
there's a couple of things I have to ask about what you learned from your investigation about first pitch,
Yeah.
right? Is there anything that jumps out about? Because I find first pitches fascinating. I did my first one in the Cape League last summer, which I'll get to in a second. But what did you learn from your investigation?
So you've got it. First of all, you've got to take it from the rubber. If they say you don't have to go back out, you have to take it from there, else you look silly. But the second thing is it's further than you think. I mean, it's for unless you grew up like pitching, and even if you grew up playing baseball, it's further than you think. And you have to aim higher. I mean, basically, it's just don't bounce it. Whatever you do, don't bounce it. If it's a little bit to the right, a little even over the catcher's head, people aren't going to remember that. If you bounce it, you look like a fool.
Yeah,
That's all.
yeah, and you should be able. Did you warm up much for you?
Oh yeah. Oh
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I was
Yeah.
with Wagner. Yeah, absolutely.
So real quick, because this isn't about me, but in Colorado last year, a momentous day. Alex Cora signs his contract. Red Sox getting a bench clearing brawl. Reese McGuire. Red Sox try to fight the Rockies, and then I take a scooter back to my hotel and fall flat on my face.
Oof.
And then probably against doctor's orders, go out to dinner with Daniel Bard, have a beer, go take a red ice because there's nothing better than after possibly having a concussion, like having a beer than getting on a red eye flight. So, but the point is that I didn't realize my wrists were really, really bad. I had to throw out the first pitch. I had to. I was honored to throw out the first pitch in the Cape League. No warm, but the Cape traffic is bad, right? So
Yeah.
you're up against it. You're trying to get there just for the start of the game. No warm up. I had no concept. And all the things you said, John, like I've seen a million first pitches. E.B. Sweeney, who came to Fenway Park, I helped arrange that, and he's like, I'm throwing a slider, and boom, there he did. Shoeless Joe Jackson. Like, I'm like, oh, this is what I want to do. I get there, and long story shorter, boom, about hits the ground about 20 feet in front of the catcher. The poor kid, because I don't know, my wrist was probably broken. But anyway, I tried to commandeer every bit of video in that ballpark. So anyway, I didn't find it fat. I find that I'm so happy you did that report. So yeah, that's awesome. Good stuff.
No, I was nervous because I was at the point. The thing was, if I bounced it, I still had to air the piece the next day. So it was one of these things where it was going to get magnified no matter what happened, and I was so happy.
So I think the next report you have to do is the anatomy of spring training broadcasts, because now you're like you've certainly studied them. I am anxious to get your perspective. If you're listening to a spring training broadcast on the radio, on the app, or whatever it is, not visually, then you have a different perspective of it. We grew up listening. This was the sound of our child, Joe Castiglione and all this. But I'm anxious to get your perspective of what you think is a good broadcast, what you like about listening to it that way, how it may have changed over the years, all of that.
Well, look, the spring training. What I have liked so much this last week, and I don't Coop. What's his name?
Cooper Boardman. So he does a lot of Worcester Red Sox games, and he's a star in the making. So yeah.
So it was great. It was exactly what I want in spring training, which is you are telling me what's happening on the field, but you're also telling me what you've been seeing, during training and on the backfields, as it were. I heard from you. You saw what you said. You saw Bregman. Did you say you saw Bregman taking grounders at second base? I can't. But the bottom is
Yeah.
there's stuff that And so Bregman, who hasn't played second once in spring training, you've seen him taking the grounders at second base. That's good information. You talked about how you talked so you tell me what's on the field, which is fantastic. Then as the game goes on and the kids start coming in, you tell me about them and who they are, which is so great because this is the one time a year, for many people, when you get to see some of these prospects. Now it turns out you can watch the games on the MLB app, which is the best thing ever too. But so you start talking about Mikey Romero, and you see Mikey Romero do his thing, and he sort of has disappeared for a few years on the prospect sphere. But it's really great to hear about Mikey Romero coming up, and same with all the other kids. So it's this combination. Plus, it was super loose, and then you had Giolito up there.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, and I think
yeah.
John, listen, I could talk about this forever, and I've been doing these broadcasts for a long time. I'm path of least resistance radio, and so it's great. It's fine. I get the chance to do a lot of different stuff, but I could talk about the evolution of it, the attention span difference, and when you talk about so in case people don't know, Lucas Giolito came up to the booth for a couple of innings. Adam Ottavino did it as well a couple of times, and it was I've done podcasts with them. But you can't do a podcast on the broadcast. And they said this, John, like one of the things they said immediately, like, wow, this goes by quick, right?
Yeah.
It goes by quick. But you want, I think, broadcast to feel like a podcast in a lot of ways, I think.
Yeah, you want them to hang out. It's the thing about the vibe about spring training. If you're going to like spring training, you're not going to watch the games. What you're doing is to get the vibe of it, to get the feel. Yes, you want to see the games, but you want to see everything else that's going on too, and you want to talk baseball and feel baseball. So when you're doing those games, and what's made it so fun is that you're experiencing spring training through your broadcast. So that's what I've enjoyed.
All right, so now you're a fan. Spring training, we got a couple more weeks. Are you excited for baseball? Of course you're excited for baseball. You're a huge baseball fan. But are you getting more excited for baseball? I'm about to go down to talk to Tony Clark, the players, and we have this
great Red Sox player.
Great, what a Red Sox career, right?
Great career.
And also, thank you, Tony Clark, for not hitting it quite the right way, and not bouncing into the stands, ground rule double, right? Big for the Yankees. But we're going to talk about lockout in a couple of years. This is just how it is. It just happened. And I want to do earmuffs. I don't want to talk about it. But for you, where do you think baseball's at right now? Because there's a lot of stuff going on. Do you feel when you go to a game, when you follow a game, do you feel like baseball's in a good place?
I'm trying to decide if I want to be honest. I think it's tough. I think it's really, really tough right now. I have my sons. I have twin boys. They just turned 18. And they grew up, they're Red Sox fans. They're certainly not Yankee fans, but they won't sit and watch a game with me for 3.5 hours on TV. And come on, gather around the field. Let's listen to the radio. It's just tough, and it's I don't know. I do worry about it. I do like some of the changes that they've made. I'm not a purist. I mean, I liked when they backed off the shift a little bit. I felt like that was a little bit better. I liked some of the moves they made with relief pitching on the margins. But you see what happened with the TV contract and ESPN, and that's got to worry you. I mean, because these networks are all about the bottom line, and if they think the bottom line isn't baseball, you got to worry. So I do worry a little bit. I care more about the Red Sox winning. It's one of these things where it's not my money. I always have to remember it's not my money, so I just try to put a line in. All I want to see is the Red Sox do well, and it's not my money. But it's tough. It took me a little, like some of the pitching stuff has taken time for me to be okay with. I found myself being a little bit of a grumpy old man in the last few years, being like, I remember when they used to, and look, I'm also not. People didn't really pitch that many complete games anymore. Even in the the 80s and 90s, they did more than now. But it's not like everyone was pitch. But I remember when the pitchers used to pitch 7 innings.
Oh,
And now that never happens anymore. The relief pitchers, you have 14 pitchers a game, and that gets tough. But I've sort of begun to appreciate it. I think a little bit more as you understand it more, you get used to it. You see some of the better managers do it right, but it's hard. It's hard.
I think that baseball understands exactly what you're talking about when it comes to starting pitchers. I think that, Theo Epstein for us obviously has the ear of MLB. I think he's been a big proponent of understanding, hey, we got to get the starting pitchers back in the mind of everybody. You got to have, hey, I have the Paul Skeens ticket. I have the ticket, right? And we've been talking, I don't know if you heard on the broadcast, but Coop brought it up about, because we were talking about how we're going to go up to Dunedin, which is, oh my goodness. Again, the Chilean Myers didn't complain about this, but like driving to Dunedin in spring training and the traffic is awful. But I'm like, hey, I'm going to stop. Paul Skeens is pitching in Sarasota. That is what a guy I'm going to go out of my way for. And he asked, like, what pitcher would you do that for? And there's just not a lot of them. There's just not a lot anymore. And he always used to be, like you said, I have the Pedro ticket, right?
Yeah.
So
I mean, honestly, I heard you guys had that conversation about Skeens. And other than Skeens right now, there isn't one. There isn't.
Who was, so I asked Alice Core this the other day, and he said Kevin Brown. Who was your guy? I mean, it would have been Pedro? Or?
It was Pedro. It was Pedro. And that was, people, I don't think understand what that was like for those few years unless they were in it. I mean, first of all, it felt longer than it actually was. It really only was like 5-year stretch with the Red Sox. But it was stunning. I mean, it was every one of those games was stunning. My wife, I remember vividly. My wife, who was I guess she was my girlfriend then, but we were living together, and it was the game, the Red Sox Yankees game, when he struck out 17 or 18. Chili Davis hit the home run, but that was the only hit off of him.
Yeah.
He went the complete game, and at the end of the game, the game ends, he wins, and he's in a trance, like he doesn't, it was a religious experience for my wife and I. We were sitting there going, this is like a religious experience for all of us, including Pedro. He was in this other place. He was in this other place completely. And I don't think we've seen anything quite like that since. I mean, people got up for Chris Sale for a little bit. I mean, there were the Sale days, and they were good, but it wasn't the same thing.
Yeah. Well, listen, I really enjoyed talking with you. And I hope we can get the t-shirts are on the way. Anytime you want in the broadcast booth, you have an open invitation. Anything you need. Like you are in a world where we want to keep spreading the gospel of baseball not being boring. So
listen, thank you for the work that you do and have always done. It's a blast reading you and listening to you. So this has been pure joy.
Okay. Well, if Alex Cora, if the Red Sox win the World Series, you can also commit to getting a baseball isn't boring tattoo if you want. But
that's just, if that's what it takes, I would do that. Are you kidding me? A tattoo for a World Series win? That's a no-brainer.
Awesome. Thanks so much.